The dust settled around the excavation site as Dr. Veloc pressed his four-fingered hand against the ancient stone seal. His species, the Cathrani, had spent 300 years mapping the galaxy and cataloguing the ruins of extinct civilizations. They considered themselves the universe's historians, preserving the memories of those who came before. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for what lay beneath the barren surface of this forgotten moon. The seal cracked with a sound that echoed across the empty plain. His assistant, a young Cathrani named Scylla, stepped back nervously. The symbols carved into the stone were older than anything they had ever discovered. According to their dating instruments, these markings were over 2 million years old. The Cathrani civilization itself was only 800,000 years old. Whatever species had built this vault had been ancient when the Cathrani's ancestors were still swimming in warm oceans. Veloc's breathing apparatus hummed softly as he descended into the darkness below. The air inside was stale but breathable. His lights revealed a corridor stretching deep into the rock, its walls covered in strange pictographs and mathematical equations. The language was unknown, but the images told a story that needed no translation. The first panel showed a galaxy filled with countless species. Ships traveled between stars, and great stations orbited around suns. It depicted a time of prosperity and cooperation among dozens of intelligent races. Veloc recorded everything, his excitement growing with each step forward. The second panel changed the tone entirely. It showed a single planet, third from its star, covered in blue oceans and green continents. The creatures depicted on its surface were primitive, walking on two legs with only minimal body covering. They carried simple tools made of stone and wood. They hunted animals and gathered plants. By galactic standards, they were insignificant. They had not even discovered fire in many of the images. But the ancient artists had drawn these primitive beings with obvious fear. The detail in their expressions showed terror and concern. Veloc found this strange. Why would advanced species capable of building vaults that lasted millions of years fear creatures who had not yet invented the wheel? The third panel provided answers that made Veloc stop walking entirely. It showed these primitive beings changing rapidly in what appeared to be a very short time span. They went from stone tools to metal weapons. They built structures and formed organized societies. They domesticated other creatures and began reshaping their world to suit their needs. The speed of their development was depicted through a series of images compressed together, showing hundreds of generations of progress in what seemed like moments compared to the other species shown. Scylla caught up with her mentor and gasped at what she saw. The walls showed these beings doing something no other species had done. They were adapting to every environment on their planet. They spread across deserts, mountains, frozen lands, and tropical forests, where other species evolved to fit their surroundings. These creatures changed their surroundings to fit themselves. The fourth panel depicted something even more disturbing. These primitive beings had begun to record their thoughts. They created symbols that could preserve knowledge across generations. where other species took millions of years to develop such systems. These creatures had done it in mere thousands. The ancient artists showed this development with clear alarm, drawing warning symbols around these images. Veloc noticed that the pictographs became more detailed and urgent as the corridor continued. The species that had built this vault had clearly been watching these primitive beings closely. They had been monitoring their progress with growing concern. The fifth section of the corridor showed predictions. The ancient species had calculated where these primitive beings were heading. They showed images of great cities rising from the surface of that blue planet. They depicted machines that could think and vessels that could carry these beings beyond their atmosphere. Most disturbing of all, they showed these creatures standing among the stars, looking outward with hunger in their eyes. The ancient builders had included mathematical projections alongside these images. Veloc's translation software struggled with the precise meanings, but the general message was clear. These primitive beings would not remain primitive. Their rate of advancement was unlike anything the ancient species had ever observed. What took other civilizations millions of years, these creatures would accomplish in mere tens of thousands. At the end of the corridor, Veloc found the main chamber. It was vast, carved from solid rock and reinforced with metals that his equipment could not identify. In the center stood a crystalline structure that pulsed with faint light. Even after 2 million years, the power source still functioned. The technology required to create such lasting energy was beyond anything that Kathrani had achieved. The chamber walls were covered in text. Dense blocks of writing surrounded by warning symbols and cautionary images. Scylla began scanning everything, her device working overtime to process the massive amount of information. As the translation algorithms ran, Veloc approached the central crystal. When he touched it, the chamber came alive. Holographic projections filled the space, showing star maps and planetary systems. The display focused on a particular arm of the galaxy, highlighting a small yellow star with several planets orbiting around it. The third planet was marked with pulsing red indicators. A voice began speaking in a language that had been dead for 2 million years. The Catherine's universal translator took several moments to begin making sense of it. The message was a warning, recorded by a species called the Voranthi, who had once ruled a significant portion of the galaxy. The Voranthi speaker explained that they had discovered a species on a distant world that defied all. Conventional, understanding of evolution and development. These beings, who called themselves something that translated roughly to humans, possessed traits that made them uniquely dangerous. First, they were social predators who formed cooperative groups, but also competed intensely within those groups. This combination of cooperation and competition drove them to constantly improve and innovate. They did not wait for natural selection to solve problems. They solved problems themselves, often within single generations. Second, they had extremely short lifespans compared to most intelligent species. where the Vorinthi lived for thousands of years and the Kathrani lived for centuries. These humans lived only decades, but this apparent weakness was actually their greatest strength. Their short lives meant that generations passed quickly, ideas spread rapidly, cultures changed constantly. What took other species eons to develop, humans accomplished in centuries. Third, they had a psychological trait that the Vorinthi could not fully explain. Humans refused to accept limitations. When faced with impossible challenges, they did not adapt to accept those challenges. They worked obsessively until they found ways to overcome them entirely. They treated the impossible as merely difficult. They treated the difficult as simply a matter of time. The Vorinthi recording explained that they had debated extensively about how to handle the human situation. Some had argued for intervention, for guiding these dangerous beings toward a safer path of development. Others had argued for containment, for finding ways to limit human expansion when they eventually reached the stars. But the final decision had been to do nothing. The Vorinthi had concluded that any interference would only accelerate human development. If threatened, humans would unite and advance even faster. If guided, they would learn from their teachers and then surpass them. The only safe approach was to leave no trace, to hide all evidence of galactic civilization from human observation, and to hope that by the time humans found the stars, the older species would be ready. The recording continued with a confession that chilled Vlok to his core. The Vorinthi admitted that they were not the first species to discover humans. They were actually the seventh. The previous 6 species had all attempted various interventions. The first had tried to make peaceful contact. The second had tried to establish trade. The third had tried to share technology. The fourth had tried to impose restrictions. The fifth had tried to quarantine the human homeworld. The sixth had tried to destroy them entirely. All 6 species were now extinct. The Vorinthi did not know exactly what had happened in each case, but the pattern was clear. Any species that interfered with human development eventually ceased to exist. The humans themselves had not directly destroyed these civilizations. At the time of the recording, humans were still using bronze and worshipping primitive gods. But somehow, the act of interfering with humans carried a price that no species survived paying. The Vorinthi had built this vault as a warning to future species. They themselves planned to withdraw from the galactic stage to hide their civilization so completely that humans would never know they existed. They hoped that this strategy would allow them to survive, but they were not confident. The recording ended with a simple statement. The Vorinthi predicted that within 100,000 years, humans would be traveling between stars. Within 200,000 years, they would be the dominant species in the galaxy. Within 500,000 years, they would begin reaching beyond the galaxy itself. The Vorinthi hoped that future species would heed their warning. Do not interfere with humans. Do not make contact. Do not draw their attention. Simply watch, wait, and hope. Vlok stepped back from the crystal, his mind struggling to process what he had learned. The Vorinthi were extinct now. No trace of their civilization remained except for this vault. Whether their strategy of hiding had worked or failed was impossible to know. But the humans had clearly survived. Scylla approached her mentor with trembling hands. The wall translations had completed, and the data confirmed everything in the recording. But there was additional information that the recording had not included. The walls contained detailed observations of human behavior collected over thousands of years of secret monitoring. The ancient Varenthi had documented human capacity for violence, noting that humans killed each other in conflicts that seemed to have no purpose. But they had also documented human capacity for mercy, noting cases where humans showed compassion to enemies they could have easily destroyed. They had recorded human creativity, their art and music and stories. They had recorded human curiosity, their endless questions and experiments and explorations. The final section of the war text was a philosophical reflection. The Vorinthi had concluded that humans were not evil. They were not deliberately dangerous. They were simply too capable, too adaptable, too driven. The universe had created a species that could not be stopped, could not be contained, and could not be controlled. The only question was what that species would choose to do with its unlimited potential. Veloc gathered all of his recordings and prepared to leave the vault. His mind was already racing with the implications of this discovery. The Kithroni had encountered humans 200 years ago. They had found them curious, ambitious, and somewhat aggressive. Trade relations had been established, but the Kithroni had always felt slightly superior to these newcomers, who had only been traveling space for a few centuries. Now, Veloc understood that the Kithrani were not superior to humans. They were simply earlier. Humans had gone from stone tools to starships in less than 50,000 years. The Kithrani had taken 800,000 years to achieve the same progress. The humans were not behind. They were advancing at a rate that defied all known patterns of civilizational development. As Veloc emerged from the vault into the pale light of the distant sun, he wondered if the Vorinthi's warnings were still relevant. Humans had already spread across 1,000 worlds. They had already made contact with dozens of species. The strategy of hiding and avoiding interference was no longer possible. Perhaps it had never been possible. Perhaps the Varanthi's extinction proved that there was no way to exist alongside humans without eventually being affected by them. Perhaps the only real choice was how to be affected. Through friendship or through conflict, through cooperation or through competition. Veloc looked up at the stars and thought about the blue planet described in the ancient vault. Somewhere out there, the descendants of those primitive beings were building new ships, founding new colonies, and pushing ever further into the unknown. They were doing exactly what the Vorinthi had predicted. They were becoming the dominant species in the galaxy, and they had no idea that ancient civilizations had feared them. They had no idea that warnings about their potential had been carved into vaults 2 million years ago. They simply kept moving forward, solving impossible problems, refusing to accept limitations, and reaching for more. Veloc made a decision as he walked back to his ship. He would share this discovery with the Kithrani leadership, but he would recommend a different response than the Vorinthi had chosen. Hiding had not saved the Vorinthi. Fear had not protected the 6 species who came before them. Perhaps the only hope was the opposite approach. Perhaps the only way to survive the rise of humanity was to join it, to become partners rather than observers, to earn a place in whatever future these remarkable and terrifying beings would create. It was a gamble. But after seeing what he had seen, Veloc knew that gambling alongside humans was better than betting against them. 2 million years of warnings had made that much absolutely clear.